this confirmation roundtable to consider the nominations of Andrew Sullivan and Martin Skolniff to serve on the Board of Real Estate Appraisers. While it is not mandatory for the council to affirm these nominations to the board, I thought it wise to conduct today's hearing, giving the public an opportunity to learn about the board nominees and the board itself again. The first resolution under discussion today is PR 24-134, the Board of Real Estate Appraisers Andrew Sullivan Confirmation Resolution of 2021. This measure would reappoint Mr. Sullivan as a real estate appraiser licensed and in good standing in the district as a member of the board for a full term to end on the 26th of June, 2023. The second resolution is PR 24-135, the Board of Real Estate Appraisers Martin Skolniff Confirmation Resolution of 2021. And this measure would appoint Mr. Skolniff as a real estate appraiser licensed and in good standing in the district as a member of the board, replacing Todd Canterbury for the remainder of an unexpired term to end on June 26, 2022. The board is a small and often overlooked entity in DC government, but it plays a vital role in the ecosystem of our various housing boards and agencies. The largest investment almost any of us will ever make in our lifetimes is to purchase a home. It's critical that the professionals who assess the values of these properties are qualified, competent, and current with regards to evolving trends in real estate values and practices. The board licenses appraisal professionals, consults with counterparts in other jurisdictions to share important information on changes in the real estate market. And it has been a vital resource for the council since I joined the council and the housing committee some years ago. I always look forward to meeting with the chairperson, Pampas, every year during the budget season and engaging with her during the performance oversight hearings. It is an educational exercise that provides critical insight for our committee and I hope for the community. Today's roundtable is an important opportunity for me to discuss the priorities and perspectives with the most recent nominees, one new and one returning. Mr. Sullivan, he has served on the board since 2017, and he works as an appraiser and a senior appraiser since 2001. He is a graduate from St. John's College High School and Montgomery College and the University of Delaware. Mr. Sullivan has valued over $20 billion in commercial and real estate property in the district, according to his resume. Mr. Skolniff, our second and new member to the board nominee, has had an extensive career working in real estate appraisal and in teaching in the greater DMV area, as we call it, the Washington metropolitan area. He has nearly a dozen years of experience with Freddie Mac and also previously served as director of the Real Property Tax Administration in the district. He holds an MBA from the University of Baltimore and a professional certificate in real estate from the Johns Hopkins University. I look forward to our discussion today. And while I'm confident it will be informative to both the committee and hopefully the viewing members of the public. Thank you. So now I will turn to the testimonies of Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Skolniff, who are the subject of the confirmation resolutions before us today. Are the parties in the room yet?
We're elevating them now.
All righty. Okay.
Yes.
They're both in the room now.
All right. So I will ask Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Snark if you will raise your right hand so we can swear you in.
Let's get their cameras on.
This is Marty Skolnick. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I can,
Good.
sir.
All right, thank
All
you.
right. And Mr. Sullivan?
Hello, hello.
All right, okay. Do you swear and affirm your testimony and any statements that you make before the committee today to be truthful and complete?
Yes,
I do.
All right, thank you very, very much. And I'll now ask Mr. Sullivan, do you have a statement that you would like to make?
Yes. 1 minute. Yes. Hi. Good morning, Councilwoman Bonds and the committee. My name is Andrew Sullivan. As the Councilwoman stated, I've been an appraiser in the district area for over 20 years here. And I have mostly done my work within the Washington, D.C. area. I've been on the board now for since 2017, as was pointed out earlier. And it's been a learning experience. Some of the things that I think one of the things I liked the board does, as the Councilwoman knows, the outreach at Gallaudet, the educational seminar. But I helped also spearhead an effort to offer additional education that was targeted towards our appraisal licensees. I also would point out that, as the councilwoman pointed out, the home own the largest investment. So it's very important that the citizen be protected and the general public. So that is something that I think is of utmost importance. And as far as the board going forward, I believe that, again, spearheading the education, we build on this. You know, when I started, I thought we would offer one more program, and we did that, and we had outstanding success with the interest from our licensees. And the way I see this is as a preventive measure to stop, you know, any complaints. And as the well aware, we don't receive a tremendous amount of complaints. I'd like to thank Councilwoman Bonds, the committee, and the mayor for taking time and hearing this today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan, for your statement. And you mentioned a program that a new program. Can you tell us just a little more about that?
Sure. We now offer, you know, I'm also go to the ARROW conferences. So that's the Appraiser Regulatory Association of Appraiser Regulatory Officials. And the offering we had was USPAP, the Uniform Standards of Professional Practice for appraisers. And we had a huge turnout from our licensees. And so I always think that, you know, instead of, it seems to be too much corrective education, and why not, you know, get it on the front end and go for the preventive. What happens there is you don't have, it minimizes your complaints. So that's kind of what we thought what we would take as an approach to the education.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I'll have just a few more questions for you. And of course, Mrs. Snolik, I want you to have an opportunity to make a statement. And welcome. You're new. Welcome.
I'm new. Thank you. Although I've known Andrew for many, many years, we used to work together when I was the director of real property tax in DC. So, hi, Andrew. Councilmember Bonds, I'd like to thank you for this hearing. I'd like to thank the mayor for putting my name forward for the Board of Real Estate Appraisers. And I look forward to being able to give you a little bit of my background. I am new to you all here. My background is that I have about 40 years, a little over 40 years of real estate appraisal, asset management, and organizational management experience in government in corporations, and as an independent real estate appraiser and consultant. I've valued, appraised almost every kind of property there is, mostly the Mid-Atlantic region, Washington, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Delaware. But I've done real estate analytical work across the country for national firms. Currently, as you said, council member, I'm the chief appraiser for Freddie Mac Multifamily, headquartered in McLean, Virginia. I'm responsible for the review, the audit, and the quality assurance of third-party multifamily appraisals on every type of multifamily property you can think of: affordable properties, rent-restricted properties, market rate properties, co-ops, senior housing, and student housing. And I'm responsible for the multifamily national appraisal policy for Freddie Mac Multifamily. Previous to Freddie Mac, I was the director of real property tax in DC, which involved, as you know, administration of the property tax laws, the assessment valuations, tax exemptions, planning of the citywide reassessments, the recorder of deeds function, and the annual tax sale of delinquent taxes. In my past, I've been an author. I've contributed articles to the Appraisal Journal, the Assessment Journal, the Corridor Business Journal, the Baltimore Business Journal, and the Central Penn Business Journal. I have the MAI appraisal designation from the Appraisal Institute. Again, in my past, I've been qualified as an expert witness in bankruptcy court and U.S. bankruptcy court, in Maryland tax court, Pennsylvania Court of Common Pleas, in various boards of assessment appeal in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and in DC. And as you mentioned, I have taught. I've taught in the Master of Science in Real Estate program at Johns Hopkins, both at their building on Mass Avenue and also in their Columbia office. And I've taught entry-level real estate appraising for Anne Arundel Community College. So my interest in this position is kind of twofold. Giving back to my profession and giving back to my community. I had a mentor years and years ago that explained that there are two basic stages to a professional career. The first stage is what you learn in your craft. The second phase is what you do with what you've learned, earning a living, but then also part of that is giving back to the profession. And that's where I see my position on the board being part of. I've tried to provide that give back as a mentor, as a trainee, as a trainer for junior appraisers, as a touchstone for senior appraisers who have some complex appraisal problems, and I've published the article. So that's where I kind of see this fit in. So the second part, giving back to the profession and giving back to the community, I've been a resident of DC for only 11 years, and I'm not a joiner. I don't join community meetings. I don't go to my ANC meetings. I don't have school-age kids. I'm not active in local schools or PTA. So appraising is what I know, and this is a way to be able to give back to my community by being a steward of the real estate profession in DC. I've appraised properties in basically 5 states. I've been licensed in 5 states since the licensing became mandatory in the 1990s. Could I tell you what all the different states' regulations are? No, I couldn't. But I know that it's a complex web for an appraiser to navigate. And I bring that experience to this position. I bring a network of other appraisers, local and around the country, who also have to navigate the web of both licensing and relicensing, and then any answering complaints from the public or from industry. And I bring that level of experience to this. DC is kind of unique. It is geographically centered in the Mid-Atlantic region. It's geographically smaller, and there are a lot of appraisers that come into DC from the surrounding areas. So I think if it's not already being done, there's opportunities for outreach to the appraisers in these other areas through Appraisal Institute chapter meetings, the American Society of Appraisers. There's a group called the Collateral Risk Network that's residential appraisers and risk managers, all have an interest in how DC administers their appraisal regulations. And reaching out to them is something that I've done in the job as chief appraiser at Freddie Mac. I can bring to the table here. The other thing that I think is already being done, but I think can be expanded on a little bit, is sharing best practices, both regionally and nationally. If the DC Board of Appraisers has an issue that it's struggling with, whether it's a property or a situation, the odds are that there's another board someplace in the country that had a similar situation, and reaching out and talking about best practices around the country would be very, very helpful. One thing in preparation for this hearing, one thing I asked was a couple few commercial appraisers that I'd in my network. I asked them about licensing, DC in specific and licensing in general, and where were their issues, where were their hot button issues. One of them was in temporary licensing. And none of the 3 or 4 folks I talked to was currently looking for a temporary license, but they've experienced it in the past. And around the country, it's a very difficult, kludgy situation to get a temporary license. In the old days, 10 years ago, the average time for an commercial appraisal report delivery was about a month. Appraiser had a month from beginning to end to deliver the report, and there's plenty of time to get a temporary license in that time period. Today, the average turnaround time, the average delivery time of a multifamily appraisal report is less than 2 weeks. And in many jurisdictions around the country, that's not enough time for the appraiser to get temporary licensing and to meet the regulatory standards. So that's something I would like to, if I'm placed on the board, I'd like to study. Is that an issue in Washington? And if it is, what are some creative solutions to fix that? So that's me. Councilmember Bonds, I want to thank you for listening and hearing me out and listening to my background. I'd like to thank Mayor Bowser for nominating me and her staff for putting this forward. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Great.
Thank you both for your comments. And I do have a few questions to pose to each of you. One, can you broadly outline, without revealing any confidential information, how candidates seeking to be licensed in DC perform in the licensure process as compared to other local jurisdictions? And Mr. Sullivan, we'll start with you, Mrs. Schnonek.
Okay.
Can you,
Well, go ahead, Andrew.
can you repeat that one more time?
I'm looking for whether or not if you have a sense of how the candidates that are looking to be licensed in DC perform in the licensing process as they are doing their appraisals and what have you, in comparison to other neighborhoods within our metropolitan Washington area.
Thank you.
So let me jump in. I have a small staff at Freddie Mac, and I tend to hire college hires, new people right off the street who want to be involved in financial analysis, and we do appraisal review work and we do training. One of the benefits they have is the volume of work that we do in appraisal reviews. It's multifamily appraisal reviews. And some of the folks that I've worked with, I've trained, want to be real estate appraisers. Our headquarters are in Virginia. It's difficult in Virginia to get appraisal certification doing only appraisal review work. The work they do is very intense. The work they do is high quality and it's very detailed, but the state of the Commonwealth of Virginia doesn't permit the same level of credit to review work as primary appraisal field work. DC, Maryland, Pennsylvania, many other states look at appraisal review work and go, no, that's credible work, and we're giving you credit for that kind of work. So it's more difficult in other areas for some of the specialty kind of non cookie cutter type of appraising work done.
So this would lead me to asking then, and Mr. Sullivan might want to respond to this, what are the different roles that are available in the appraisal community professions? Because you said appraiser reviewer, and then there is the appraiser, and I guess there are many others.
I would say, just going back to the first part, one thing that we do, and that Chairwoman Pappas is very good at, we allow new licensees to come in anytime and ask any questions. And the staff we have there, Mr. Leon is also very supportive of that and making sure. So very open for them to come in and ask anything. So it something that wasn't available when I was around. So it helps, really helps a lot. And we've actually gotten positive feedback from new licensees, because it helps them direction. So I can't speak to the other jurisdictions. I'm not sure, how they handle that, but that was one thing that we've done that has been a great benefit to the new people. Also on a national level, this is something that's rolling out. I'm on a member of AERO, and I chair the ASC committee. And there's a new way to get experience, and it's a computerized model called COHEA, but I won't go all into this at this time. But so that now allows, speaking to Mr. Skolnick's issues, where some people only have experience in one area, you can go on the, like a web-based platform and gain experience that way. So that's what they have coming out. That's all.
Just to piggyback on what Mr. Sullivan said, the customer service we've gotten from the DC office, the board has been way better than other jurisdictions. Without, I'm not going to name jurisdictions, but when I've had questions, and not even as a new licensee, but as somebody renewing or just with questions, I've had very positive responses, quick responses back from the board members and from the staff, better than most.
Okay, and so then the different roles in this appraisal profession are what? I come in off the street, so what am I expected to first learn to do?
The most obvious one is the real estate appraiser. That's the residential real estate appraiser, typified as the person who has a clipboard, a tape measure, a camera as part of a lending or a house purchase. Take that to another level. It's the commercial real estate appraiser who does that for commercial transactions, sales. Still with the clipboard, still with the camera, still with the tape measure. A lot more things are being done with iPads and digital, but that's the residential and the commercial real estate appraiser, the ones that are in the field on the ground. There's the reviewer, whether it's the lender or somebody at the IRS that gets that appraisal report and reviews it for compatibility with whatever their regulations are. If it's residential, it could be to the regulations of the FDIC. It could be to the regulations of Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae. It could be to the IRS regulations on what does an appraisal have to contain. If it's like a condemnation, like a transportation, the rules for a condemnation appraisal are a little different than for a lending appraisal. So you have a group of people who review those appraisal reports. In the residential world, you have a group called the appraisal management companies that act as a go-between between individual lenders, banks, and the appraisal community. Instead of a small community bank staffing up with 3 or 4 or 5 salaried employees to order and review appraisals, they'll contract to an appraisal management company to do that work, to contact the appraiser, to review that appraisal report, to make sure the appraiser gets paid. And they're a relatively recent go-between, but it relieves, and there's pluses and minuses, but it relieves the smaller lending institutions from the burden of that overhead of ordering those appraisals. You have a whole nother set of government appraisers, like Mr. Sullivan, who works for OTR and the assessment office. There's a whole group of appraisers that are personal property appraisers. That my background's real estate. You have people who have to appraise like the furniture, fixtures, and equipment at a hotel. That's an entire different genre of appraisers that are also covered by the Board of Real Estate Appraisers.
Very interesting. Thank you. So I hope that if there are members of the public that have a knack for understanding and valuing properties, if they are interested in this industry, that they'll be in touch with our board and learn how they too can use their trade to the advantage, hopefully, of the community. I have a few more questions. Have you heard any concerns raised in the community that homeowners who are African or African American or other minorities may have various artifacts within their property or decorations in their home that they feel has caused a drop in their appraised real estate value when there are inspections?
I just would say that I've heard throughout the country, there's some areas, so maybe you have as well, this on a national basis. There's been complaints within the city, but then, I gave this more thought. I talked about this with Chairwoman Pappas and going back to, you don't need to wait till there's a problem to take action. You can always do something before to prevent it. And I said, well, what would you do here? We could always offer a webinar. So this would be easy for the, licensee to just remind them to focus on the property and the real estate and the personal belongings. And it could be from any minor group or irrelevant. You're not to be really giving them any weight or any notice. But the city itself, fortunately, hasn't had it to be an issue. But that would be something that an outreach educational program, whack and keep us on the right path.
Would you offer the educational program to prospective sellers or buyers, or would you, in other words, the public, or just for the appraisers?
Well, the webinar could be something, since it's web-based, I guess you could, anyone really could access it. Could be open to all, but it's targeted towards the person or individual, the appraiser valuing the property, and to keep them just to remind that, sometimes someone's messy. You can have those starting, and they say someone might come up with all that means they don't take, the home's not in good shape, the bones, it has nothing to do with that. They just, didn't, so I guess, but you could actually offer it both to the appraisers and the public, or you could do different platforms, one for the public, one for the appraisers.
Very interesting. I think that there will be many who will be very interested in what can be done. So we'll look forward to this webinar, the opportunity for people to learn more about the value of their property and how to, clean it up so that it looks, inviting, and you get top value. Everyone is interested in top value, and we in the city have to be as well, because as I say so many times, we live off of each other. We do not raise a crop. We do not really manufacture big things. Although Congress, if you're listening, we do have areas set aside for manufacturing, and we have small manufacturing like concrete, asphalt, or something like that I'm familiar with. But seriously, this is an area that I think more and more we find the public interested in. And so let's see what we can do with those ideas, Mr. Sullivan, for sure.
Yes.
Mr. Skolnick, did you want to add or anything or?
Um, just a couple of thoughts. I haven't been a field residential appraiser for years. I saw an article just recently that mentioned, Councilmember Bonds, what you were talking about. As an appraiser professional, we're taught early on in our careers and continually as we take continuing education that we are to focus on the data. We're to focus on whether it's a residence, an office building, a mall, whatever, car dealership, whatever it is, we're supposed to focus on the data without respect to the background, the race, the ethnicity of the people, persons, or the entity that owns that piece of real estate. I'm on several appraiser message boards, and regularly people have conversations about, should I have taken this picture? And they'll have a picture of a religious artifact in a house, or I was told by my client, don't take any pictures with people in it. And these are continuing conversations and a thought process in the appraisal community to try to focus on the real estate and not on the rest of the property. A homeowner shouldn't have to hide their artifacts or their personal belongings or things that are important to them just because the appraiser's coming over to take some pictures. The appraiser should be aware and be sensitive to that, but we're talking about the real estate and how that would sell in the marketplace.
Well, I appreciate your comment. Thank you very much. But also, I guess I'm also thinking about Mr. Sullivan's response, because the reality is that no matter how we have rules and regulations, there is the emotional element that will sometimes be a very determining factor in any transaction. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's look at another area. Before we go there, let's talk a little bit. Are you aware of any predatory property owners or developers you've, I guess, encountered on a regular basis? Are you aware? I mean, I know they're out there. The world knows they're out there, but I wondered if you, in your work, have run across these individuals.
Let me take a stab at that. In my area at Freddie Mac Multifamily, I'm focused on the appraisal reports. We have a lot of people that are focused on fraud, on reviewing all the loan transactions. The appraisal is just one part of a large loan transaction. And I don't want to speak out of turn for Freddie Mac, but we have a lot of people focused on trying to be a fair and responsible secondary mortgage market lender. In my work, I don't see that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Mr. Sullivan, you want to respond or?
Yeah, as far as that, I'm aware of situations that have gone on. I don't want to, specifically, but obviously, Mr. Racine and his group do a good job with following up with that when these issues happen, perhaps, and unfortunately, this is where I've seen more when we go back to racial minorities and minority groups, you see this. Not so much the undervaluing, sometimes maybe it's an overvaluing situation where, someone gets in over their head and that is really can be life altering for that person, and not just that they lose their home, but it's the family dynamic and what happens to that family, where they live and things like that. So that is extremely important. And there's been cases, it's been in the news, so it's public, where they've gotten into properties that aren't really worth what they're worth, and the construction's not up to par, and maybe they in the first place should not have been valued at what it should have been valued at. So yes, that has happened.
Well, then let me then just try and talk about some of the situations that we see in community. And most recently, there's been a couple of cases where it's been brought to our attention that properties that are less than 5 years old have shown great deterioration. So when the property was appraised and valued so that the buyer was comfortable that they were buying a 300, 400, 500, $600,000 property, and then a few years later, things changed. You know, it shows a lot of structural damage. Is there a way for the appraiser, or does the appraiser kind of look for, in new projects or renovated projects, look for certain things that could be a determining factor as to maybe the life of that property?
Sure. I would just say that, the appraiser is the appraiser, and, many times we'll put that it's not a building inspector or a plumber or electrician, and not a specialist in those fields. So many times it may say in the report, it's the assumption that these items are, sufficient, and there's no, I don't, there's no reason to believe that, behind the wall, there's leaking water or anything like that. So they may be as well, they're limited. So, you can't speak to some of the components, that's a home inspector, I think, issue that is of concern, when.
Okay, Mr. Skolnick, you
Yeah.
want to add?
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Mr. Sullivan said. The appraiser, whether it's residential or commercial, most of the time is going into a finished product and cannot see behind the walls. And as a profession, we're not trained necessarily in all the structural and mechanical components. We understand them, but we're not necessarily trained the same way a plumber or an electrician or a building inspector would be. So we're seeing the completed project for the most part. For residential work, I always recommend to people I talk to, get a home inspector, get an independent home inspector. They have more experience. Again, they're seeing more than the appraiser would see, but they're not really also seeing behind the walls. At Freddie Mac multifamily, with every loan transaction we do, we have a third-party engineer and a third-party environmental consultant produce a report on those properties. And again, they can't get behind the walls, but we're relying on their expertise to give us heads up on any issues that they might see. Those kind of third party are too expensive for the average homeowner, but a home inspector is a very good idea to help out in those situations.
Okay.
And just to piggyback one time, council member, in the things that you're seeing, is there a trend in geography, in ward, in developer? I'm a data person. Is there a trend in individuals or companies that you can follow the path?
We will talk.
Okay.
Yes. I can't really put my finger on it, but I can say that there have been incidents where, if you talk to the public anecdotally, there are these accusations. Do we have the data? Let's talk about that.
Okay.
I think that would be good for the city to have a handle on that. It's one thing for the Office of Attorney General, Carl Racine, to jump on a complaint. It's another to have a sense of what's going on in the marketplace so that we can maybe prevent some of these, terrible situations, living environments,
Yeah.
folk think they're getting, you know, um, a pig for the Christmas dinner, and they are not getting that at all. It's just a pig foot or ear or something, because it's not enough. It ends up being a problem for them.
Yeah.
So I was struggling there with my analogy.
You almost
Forgive me.
got it, council member. You were almost there.
I should have said maybe a shrimp. Yes, thank you. Um, my office is particularly concerned with displacement. And the city requires more growth, as we know, and we want to put every measure in place to ensure that our seniors in particular, and the men and women who have sustained our city, continue to have a home. And so how do you see this scenario, this situation, fitting into your approach to appraisal licensure, in the way that you may have an interest in protecting seniors, persons that are vulnerable, our disabled community, because I'm one of those that believes that they are an important part of the mix of the residents of the city. I wondered what your thoughts might be on that.
I'll go.
All right.
As I mentioned, the appraisal, whether it's residential, commercial, multifamily, whatever, it should be data based. The analysis should be regardless of the resident, the owner. I think what you're talking about, council member, is out, in my opinion, my personal opinion, not my employers, but my personal opinion. I think it falls somewhat outside the box of real estate appraisal and falls more into the box of what can we do as a government to help. When I was the director of real property tax, there's a variety of programs to help the tax burden, whether it's seniors, homeowners, and maybe one of the primary solutions to the problem you posed is better directed to those policy programs. Maybe they need to be geographically focused. Maybe they need to be more generous for certain classifications. And I don't know. It's been it's been 15 years since I've been there to know the status of who's researching what and who's, the Office of Research Analysis is are people looking at those solutions. But I think professionally, I think it falls out of the box of trying to be an objective measurer of what the real estate market is saying.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Well, let's talk then a little bit about what has happened in the government that I think affects all of our agencies. You both are aware that the council and the mayor's office are focused on racial equity, and both have a standalone entity within the executive side and the legislative side that reviews programs for the executive and reviews policy legislation for the council. And I'm wondering, through the racial equity lens, how do you see the board operating over the next 2 or 3 years? What's your perspective, and what should be the perspective of the board on racial equity, particularly in the different wards? You mentioned that, Mr. Skolnick. I'm thinking east of the Anacostia River, west of the Anacostia River. because that's really the medium, the separation. We talk about um, Rock Creek Park, but it's really the river, you know.
So a couple of thoughts that and I think Mr. Sullivan could address more what the board can do, because only see it from the outside and not from the inside. One of the things I think, and I think Mr. Sullivan touched on this a little bit when he was talking about outside education, continuing education. In some states, to get to get licensed or renew your license, you have to take a state-specific law class. Like in Pennsylvania, it's a 2-hour specific to the real estate laws of Pennsylvania. I don't know of a jurisdiction that has a, for lack of a better word, a racial bias program. Maybe and it could be groundbreaking with the national firms that to get licensed or renewed in the district, you need to take a 2-hour seminar on racial disparity, racial equity, gender, race, ethnicity. All those could be topics that could be covered, which could help the mindset. And I'm not saying that appraisers don't have a good mindset, but could help reinforce the idea that this is what racial bias looks like. This is kind of the way it feels in the real estate profession. Here are some ways that you can get ahead of it in your career, in your firm. Having a mandatory course like that might go a long way to how appraisers look at property in the district.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sullivan, you want to add anything?
Yeah, this is jump the gun here, but there is a 5-hour course coming out on racial disparity and equity by the Appraisal Institute, and I discussed this with them. Again, I was just recently at the area conference, and so this is going to be developed very shortly. So this will be a great opportunity to enlighten people who need to be, and the fact, whether you know you're supposed to do something or not, there is a bias, as you know, that's all well and good that you think that you're supposed to be, but you find that people aren't as independent, objective sometimes as maybe should to be, and something like this will remind them of that things, but that's all.
Thank you very much.
If I could throw one more idea out on the
Sure.
table. The appraisal community, the appraiser community is getting old. It's the average age across the country is over 50, 55. I'm part of the legacy of the old people that have been in the industry for years and years and years since dirt was new. There are new people coming in the commercial field, which I know of. A lot of them come from outside of the district, come in, work at big companies, and then leave again. In Freddie Mac, we talk about workforce housing. We talk about, how do you help teachers and firemen and government workers live in an urban area in a city. One of the things that might be beneficial, and I don't know if anybody's studying this, but if there is a way to encourage the larger firms, where there's a lot of there's great minority-owned small firms, and I'm not excluding them. But the larger firms, if there was a way to incentivize them to hire local DC-based real estate trainees, it's expensive to train an appraiser to get licensing. The 3-year process, the workflow, the amount of hands-on time a supervisor has to give to that new appraiser to train them properly, the outside coursework they have to take. And I don't know around the country if any other jurisdiction is doing this, but trying to incentivize an appraisal firm to take on new appraisers, grow from within local people who understand the district, who understand the geography, understand the neighborhoods. I think that might help in the issues that you're talking about, Councilmember.
Thank you very much for that comment, because that's exactly where I was headed when I asked about what are the various roles that you play in this appraisal process, the profession. So if anyone is watching or hearing us today and you have this interest, let's get going with this. Let's get you into this new career that you're very interested in. And I always feel that if you have a tremendous interest and you know that there's some things that you're very good at, then you're likely to exceed. So Mr. Sullivan and hopefully Mr. Skolnick will be available to take a look at your paperwork and your application. So I'm hoping people will do that. Mr. Sullivan, what are you most proud of in your tenure on the board? Any
I think,
particular area?
yeah, I pushed for to offer the class, and maybe people weren't sure at first whether, and I was a little nervous, but then we filled right up. They had to stop so, there was a lot of interest in that. And also another project I'm working on is trying to get federal funds and grants that we can use, monies that so I've been busy with that to help fund some things as far as education wise. It certainly, I think I could be approved for a racial equity webinar or seminar or something like that. So I found an avenue. All of this takes time, and you have to do a write-up and get approval. So that would be something that I think has been a positive impact.
Okay. Is there a membership fee that is paid to the board?
From the licensees?
Yes,
Or, yeah, we receive funds, for their applications. But, in addition, for the educational, this is something new that, had found out to getting funds from the federal government to try to do some of the things we're talking about today, to implement, which would help the city. So,
okay.
but
I'll send a questionnaire over to the chairperson. I'd like to have a sense of, in writing, how that money is used, what is the amount, and
oh, I think that's an excellent idea.
and what are some of your, plans, from the board's perspective of how you can, one, get locals involved in this. I won't say an opportunity to get rid of the old, because remember, we have Uncle Joe as our president now, so we're not moving in that direction. But certainly to bring some new faces to the table, younger and faces to the table. So,
Well, they're greatly needed. There's plenty of opportunity. I think also a lot of people are retiring. So, I'm just off the top of my head, I think it's going down 20%. So there is a need for people to enter the profession. It's not that it's been in decline in the number of appraisers.
okay,
So
great. Is there anything you want to add, Mr. Skolnick?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Mr. Sullivan, anything?
yes, I'd just like to thank you for your time and all the questions you have, and also it's and your support. It's helpful to have that to make some of these things happen. So thank you.
All right. Mr. Skolnick, I do want to ask
Sure.
if there is anything that you wish to elaborate on the matter with the Office of Tax and Revenue. I just want to give you an opportunity if there's something you wanted to add.
There isn't. But in my prepared questionnaire, I, I, uh, I was the director of real property tax when Harriet Waters was discovered to have embezzled $48 million over 16 or 18 years. I was there at the tail end, the last 2.5 years. In my written comments under oath and in front of the council hearings years ago, I wasn't part of it. I didn't gain anything from it. In my position, I couldn't have discovered it. But I was asked by the CFO to resign along with multiple other people, and we did. We were at will employees. Um, I'm very public about where I was and what I did at the time, what I couldn't do at the time. And if there are any specific questions or issues anybody wants to raise, I am happy to talk about my experience there, what I could do and what I couldn't do as part of that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And you have, I think you also mentioned you have some experience with LIHTC. That's
Yes.
of particular interest to the Housing Committee, as you can imagine.
Yep. I actually wrote a paper that was published years ago in the Assessment Journal, or it was maybe as at the Assessment Annual Conference, on how LIHTC appraisals should be considered, whether the LIHTC, the tax credits, in some jurisdictions, the tax credits were considered part of the real property, and they were the developers and the housing projects were being taxed, not just the real estate, but also on the value of the tax credit. And the article that I wrote, that I think is available if you Google me and you Google low-income housing tax credits, or I can provide a copy if you wish.
Would you please?
I'd be happy to. It addresses
Okay.
that the tax credit is it's a financial incentive. It's like it's financing. So it should not be part of the real property tax. And what I do every day at Freddie Mac Multifamily is we're very active in buying mortgages on properties that have tax credits and investing in tax credits. So I'm somewhat familiar.
All right. Well, you can expect that we'll have further conversations for sure about that. That's a very important subject. We have so many projects, developments in the city that are under LIHTC, and they're aging, and so we want to figure out how we can hold on to them. Many of them contain substantial affordable units, and so we want to hold on to those units. So,
and they're affordable with a capital A and affordable with a little a.
Okay, what does that mean? Okay, you got my attention.
That's kind of how I talk about this. The capital A would be a formal, affordable, rent restricted kind of property. The little a would be workforce housing, things that a normal resident could afford. Someone who, and please, this may be taken, people who work for a living in government or in small private companies, retail workers. That's the affordable, that little a, that workforce housing. And LIHTC properties are very important in providing safe, clean housing for the residents.
All right, we're going to talk more about that. Thank you very much. Thank you to you both. We are finishing a little early. This concludes today's roundtable, and many thanks again to our nominees and the members of the committee. The next hearing before the committee will be at 2 p.m. today. And at our 2 p.m. we will be conducting a markup on the DOPA regulations. So thank you all very much. And the time is now 11:03 a.m. on the same day in which we started.
Thank you, council member.
Thank you.